And I've never been here till yesterday. It's quite a nice venue, a lot of good history in here. And what they make us understand is that they don't endorse any candidates, but they're just absolutely more than happy to get people like Ammon in here to do what he's here to do tonight. And I don't think he really needs that much introduction. But anyway, Ammon, I'm not gonna make a big windy deal here. So I just figured that Ammon will come up here, and he likes to turn his little presentations into conversations. So it'll be you guys will all enjoy it. He's got some great stuff. So anyway, Ammon Bundy, everybody.
Okay.
There's a water for you right there.
Okay.
You'll have to play around with that mic. See?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll bring it up a little bit. Thanks for being here. It's a beautiful little town. We drove straight here from Emmett. So got here, what about, maybe 10, 15 minutes ago. So stopped for lunch and stopped get gas, I guess. But besides that, we just come straight here. So thank you for having us. It's a great little place to meet, and I look forward to talking with you and having a conversation. I don't want to just rattle a whole bunch of things off and then you go home. I hope that we can actually talk and discuss things that are happening here in Idaho, the difference between northern Idaho, central Idaho, eastern Idaho. They're like completely different countries, which is fine. That's great, right? That's the beauty of living in Idaho and in the United States of America, that we can have that difference. And I hope to celebrate that and talk about it. I want to give a little bit of background of who I am. Some of you may know, others may not. Some may think you know, and hopefully we can bring those all together. I grew up on a ranch in southern Nevada. It's pretty much exactly opposite of here. We have well, if you go way up top of the mountains, way on top, there's some little patches of pines, but not very many. But there's a lot of cactuses, and there's a lot of shrub and a lot of dirt, and that's where I grew up. And I love the way I grew up. I grew up out of town, about 20 miles south of Mesquite, Nevada. There was another little horse farm just south of us, and besides that, there's nothing between them and the Colorado River, which was about 80 miles south. And we're in a little pocket because you've got the Bunkerville Mountains, which is part of the Rocky Mountain, and they go all the way to the Grand Canyon or to the Colorado River. They even go past a little bit. And then you have Lake Mead, and then you have the Mormon Mesa, and Lake Mead comes right up to the Mormon Mesa, and it creates this basically area that there's no access in it except on the very top, and that's just a little worn out road that goes right past my dad's ranch, the house I grew up in. And it dead ends, when it gets about 80 miles down there, and it turns into pavement about 15 miles in. And so I grew up in that area, and I could ride, horses. We rode horses. We didn't ride them for fun. We rode them because it was work, and we spent our time on the back of a horse. And to be honest with you, there's a lot of people that love to ride horses, enjoy it, but when I look at riding horses, it's just a lot of work, because that's what we did. That's what it was. And I might be able to get on a horse and enjoy it quite a bit now, but back then it was just when you're on the back of a horse, you were working. And we would go for days and days and days, and we had usually, 2 horses per cowboy, because you had to alternate them because it's very rough country, and when you're chasing cattle and running, roping and so forth, if you tried to do that day after day, your horse couldn't handle it. So we would alternate, and that's how I grew up. Tell you a little bit about the land and my family. We came into that area in 1877. That's 5 generations from me. So it ends up being 145 plus years now. And the original people that came in that area, they actually left. They were sent by Brigham Young from Salt Lake. They were sent down there to colonize that area. And they went through one summer, and they went back, and they reported to Brigham Young that it was uninhabitable. It was too arid, too dry, and too hot for people to survive. And so we always tease that Brigham Young started looking for the most ornery, hard-headed, stubborn, obstinate people he could find. And he found my family, and he sent us down there. And we've stayed there, and we ended up diverting the Virgin River and leveling fields. We also found that there was a lot of springs up on the mountains, and they're just little small springs, and they would capture those. Some of them were even just a wet spot on the ground. They would dig down there and capture that water and create a waterhead, and then pipe it out to a water trough. And one of those water troughs we call Rabbit. I don't know where it got its name from. It's been there since before my father even was born. And my father's 75 years old. And I've seen it has a pipe coming out, and it goes into a concrete tank. And my whole life, we used to go up there and swim, especially in the middle of the summer, because you get in the mountains, it's a little bit cooler, and of course water, and we would go up there just to refresh. And my whole life, I've seen, it's about 1.5 inch pipe, and I've seen a trickle about the size of a pencil come out of that my whole life. And I asked my dad a couple of years ago, and I said, Dad, have you ever seen that run more or less? And he's 75 years old, and he says, I've never seen it run more, or I've never seen it run less. It's always run the same. And that's the consistency of that land. Yes, it's arid. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's tough. But it's consistent. And those waters are consistent, and they're the lifeblood of the ranch. And in fact, my dad in his lifetime has taken those waters, and he's diverted it through it with pipes all over the desert, about 30-mile length. And he's put water troughs all over. And now it's increased the wildlife. It's a better place to camp, better place to hunt. The cattle can drink the water, and they can actually benefit from the land and the vegetation. Some people wouldn't call it vegetation, but it is vegetation. It's just a lot drier, right? And actually, in certain times of the year, the cattle will get really fat, and they get what we call sloppy fat. They'll just get all fat on the little grass and the shrubs, and they'll eat part of the cactus. The Joshua trees will get pears on them, and they'll eat the pears off of them, and they'll actually get fat. They'll eat the mesquite beans. These might be things that you've never even heard of, because up here they don't have them. But they'll actually get fat and very healthy, and that's what my family's been doing since 1877. And my dad loves what he does. It's hard, but he still today works like a 45-year-old man on that range, and fixing the waters and gathering the cattle. And that's the difficult part about this range, is gathering the cattle. So one of the ways that we've done it and been most successful about doing it is we'll actually put a corral around the waters, and then they're trap corrals, so the cattle can come in, but they can't get out. And that's how we gather the calves and the cows. And besides that, we just get on a horse, and we begin to, go through the range and find cows, and we rope them and brand them and work them, and that's how we do it. And so that's how I grew up. And why do I want you to know that? Well, I want you to know what is in my blood. I want you to know where I came from. I'm here to gain your confidence to possibly vote for me, to support me, through your telling your neighbors and talking, support me possibly financially, support me by maybe being a volunteer, so that we can, that's what I'm here for. And I don't expect you to just do that without knowing who I am. In fact, I think that's one of the problems that we've run into here in Idaho, that there's a disconnect of who they're voting for. And so I'm spending as much time as I can going to as many people as I can, talking to them so that they know who I am, and so that they know that they can either have confidence or not confidence in me. So that's what I'm here for. And that's why I want you to understand where I came from. I've lived here in Idaho for 7 years. We moved here in 2015. I live in Emmett. I have a beautiful wife and 6 children. My oldest is 19. She got married about a month ago, and they moved to Moscow because her husband's going to school there. And I learned that you can't say Moscow, you got to say Moscow. Otherwise they get offended, right? So, and I believe I raised her right, so I think she can, withstand all the liberalism and all the wokeness there, right? Yeah, it's well, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a little bit. So now, kind of going on again, living on a ranch and growing up that way and enjoying it and so forth doesn't necessarily qualify me for being a governor. So I want to tell you a little bit more about myself. It doesn't necessarily disqualify me either, right? I don't want to give you that impression, but when I was probably around 15 years old, my father came to me, and it was out of love, but he basically said, Ammon, this ranch isn't big enough for the both of us. And, we did at times butt heads. It was a lot of work on that ranch, and we had a 160 acre farm as well that we raised hay and fed cattle and so forth. So it was always work. But the reason why he came to me and said that is he wanted me to understand at a young enough age I could get it in my mind that the ranch just doesn't produce enough living for more than a couple families. And he's got a whole bunch of kids. I'm right in the middle, and pretty much I got to go out, at least think about going out and finding another way to make a living. That's just the realities of it. And that was hard. Even when when I was married, had multiple kids, well into, my business and so forth, all I did is long to go back to the ranch. I just wanted to go back to the ranch and have that freedom and that type of life again, right? But the realities of life is you got to make a living, right? You got to provide for your family. And so what I ended up doing, I went to a little bit of schooling in Southern Utah University. I met my wife there, and I started a fleet maintenance business where I managed and maintained commercial trucks. And I ended up moving that shortly after I married, ended up moving down to the Phoenix area, south of Phoenix, and I built that business up and ran it for 21 years, and we ended up being one of the largest private fleet maintenance companies in Arizona. And I hired hundreds of people, and I dealt with, all the things that an owner and a CEO of a company had to deal with. I managed and budgeted millions of dollars a year and provided a tremendous good service for my customers, and took care of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of local delivery trucks in the Phoenix and around the state. And I did that for 21 years. And about 17 years into it, maybe a little earlier, the entire time I'd look for different tools to help. I was looking for software. we were using like 5 or 6 different softwares, like a financial software, then a maintenance tracking software, and then I was looking for I had a work order process that was by paper, and we were, shuffling papers, and I had a whole office staff just taking the paperwork from all the technicians and putting it into work orders, and then getting it to the customers, and then them, then collecting payment and all that. And it was a huge, process that we were going through that I could see with the right tools could be simplified down to make it very much more simple for everybody. And so I decided to look for software. I'd been looking for it. I couldn't find any. Just wasn't anything that had put that all together. And so I decided, well, I live in the United States of America. There's a land of opportunity. I've got some resources. I'm going to build my own software. So I hired a developer. I had a project manager to put a team together. And it took us 3.5 years. And we developed a software, and we tested it in our shop because we had the perfect, test facility for it, because I had my customers and I would communicate with them that, hey, we're building this software. Can I test this on you, and you can give me your feedback. And I had good relationships with them. And then I would test it on my technicians. I tested on my vendors and the parts people, and then my service manager and office staff, and we got it fine-tuned to where it was really working, and it was really a great tool for our shop. And it worked so well that we knew that we could take and offer this to other shops, and they would pay for it, because the same problems that we had, they had, and we knew there was nothing out there doing what we needed to do. So we began to sell it to other shops. And now it's become one of the leading fleet maintenance shop management softwares in North America. It's all over the United States and into Canada. I don't know of anything down into Mexico. But then, pretty much close to the same, within a couple of years, I ended up selling both of those businesses. I sold my fleet maintenance business, and I sold my shop management software, and I bought some commercial buildings and so forth in Emmett, and that's mainly what I've been doing as far as income and as far as business now. And I obviously don't get to focus on that much. I would love to just go and say, build another business, do something else. But I see a great need and a great opportunity to do something in Idaho that desperately needs to be done in our country. And Idaho is different. Idaho, and in a very good way. And what is happening and the possibility of what can happen in Idaho is very exciting. And it's exciting among a bunch of other garbage. I don't need to tell you this, right? Just a whole lot of things that are breaking down, systems that are in place or put in place in order to, secure liberties that are not there anymore. Practically, they're not there anymore. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. But again, why do I tell you the story of business and some of the things that I've been successful at? It's not my nature to get up here and tell you these things, but I need you to know what I've done. I need you to understand that I do have the ability to, and have done it, to budget millions of dollars a year, to hire and work and manage people, to communicate in that way, and ultimately to get people to on the same direction, going the same direction, right? And get them to their buy-in and give them a vision of what the way we need to go and the direction we need to go, and be a leader in that way. And I think those skills that I had to learn as someone who was in business are many of those same skills that I will need as a governor. Now, I think I'm going to stop talking about myself here, and let's start talking about Idaho a little bit. I'll give you get you going here a little bit, because Idaho is, as as wonderful and beautiful as Idaho is, did you know that Idaho was the first state during 2020 to arrest people for going to church? Imagine that. It's one of our first protected rights, right? The First Amendment, we always say it. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. And I don't have my Idaho Constitution with me. But Article 1, Section 18 says that the people's rights to worship shall be guaranteed, shall be protected. And yet Idaho is the very first state to actually arrest somebody for having church. And Idaho is also the first state to arrest a mother for taking her children to the park. We were also one of the first states, and I keep kicking that. Turn this just a little bit. Idaho is also one of the first states. I haven't verified that it was the first state, but it's one of them. I think California might have been the first, but to actually send their state police or a police force to raid a business for not complying to the lockdown orders. And that happened in Ketchum, Idaho. And so, we may think that we are in a bubble, which in one way we are, right? But the effects of what are going on in Idaho are a little too close to home for me. And to say that in Idaho, we were the first state to arrest somebody for having church, that to me is, just to say that happened in the United States, right, is something that is hard for my mind to get wrapped around. But then to say it happened in Idaho, Moscow, right?
Yeah,
Moscow, Idaho.
University towns.
Yeah, that's where it happened. And why did these things happen? What was the justification? Do we know? Our governor, who's supposed to be, a friend to liberty, decided that he was going to collect a bunch of money from the federal government, put the state of Idaho in emergency status when we had no real threat at all. When he put us in emergency status, he did it on the same day that $50 billion was released to states that were in emergency status. We had one unconfirmed COVID case in Idaho. Then on March 25th, which is the same day that Congress decided to release $2 trillion for states that are in extreme emergency status, Governor Little issued an extreme emergency order that same day, March 25th, and we had 136 unconfirmed cases of COVID. So he didn't do it because of COVID, and he clearly says in his order in 2020-07, he says that because of all these monies are being released from Congress, on March 13th, I put the state in its emergency status. On March 25th, in extreme emergency status. Therefore, we qualify for all this money. And then he says, and I encourage you, remember, 2020-07, so the year, and then the seventh order he did that year. I believe that's the way it works, right? So 2020-07, go read it for yourself. Then he says that all these things, therefore, I'm going to create a committee, and we're going to decide where these funds go. And I decide who's on the committee, and he even says this, and they serve at the pleasure of the governor. Imagine that. They serve at the pleasure of the governor, and then that the funds will come to the governor, to the office of the governor, and we will decide how these funds are spent. Any idea how much funds he's received that have gone from the United States Treasury, or actually the Department of Defense, which I don't understand that, but they've either come from basically the federal government directly to the office of the governor in the excess of $18 billion. $18 billion. Okay? And now he's basically has full discretion on where he spends that, him and his buddy, and that little committee that he's created serve at the pleasure of the governor. Now, how are funds supposed to be spent in Idaho? Right. The legislature is the one who's supposed to determine. They're our representatives, right? We elect them, we send them up there to represent us. They're supposed to be the bosses because they're our representatives. We're ultimately the sovereign. We send them there. And one of the ways that we know that it's supposed to work in government is that our representatives are the ones that's supposed to control the money. Right? Control the money, and you control a whole lot of other things, right? And so that's the way it was designed. But our governor has now found a way in which he can bypass that. Now he doesn't need the legislature. He's not beholden to them. Now they're fully funded. We're talking about, 10 to 12 times the annual state budget is what he's received. So it's a tremendous amount of money. And now he's able to do all the things that him and his buddies have wanted to do. And the legislature has blocked him. Now he can do those things, and he doesn't have to have their permission. And also, he doesn't have to have the people's permission because our representatives are pretty much cut out of the deal. And why aren't our representatives screaming, saying, look, you're not supposed to do this. The Constitution doesn't allow you to do it. Well,
many of them were.
They were.
Yes.
They kind of were. Yeah, I was highly involved in it, but you're right. At some point they did.
It wasn't completely silent.
And they weren't talking necessarily about the money, what they were going to do in 2020, and that was a lot of because we were contacting them. We were, sending certified letters, and we even went and got multiple opinions from attorneys' offices, from different attorney firms. And because the law only allows the governor to keep the state in a state of emergency for 30 days. And if it can be justified, he can extend that for another 30 days, so 60 days total. And after that, if he doesn't turn the power back over to the legislature, then the law says, Idaho law says, then the legislature shall, that's an order, right, shall convene on the 90th day. And then they have the power to concur on a joint resolution to end the order, right? So the legislature, we informed them of this. They started to talk and started to move. And the day was January 23rd, 2020. And so there was a call out to all the legislature to come to the Capitol building on January 23rd. The problem is they were scared. They were scared too. And so then they began to, and then the governor got his attorney, and they wrote an opinion and sent it to all the legislature. So this is the governor's attorney, right? And the governor's attorney says that the legislature doesn't have, remember, we're talking about the legislative branch, we're talking about the executive branch. They're equal branches of government, right? They're independent. One's the representative, one's the government with the bureaucracies and the agencies, right? Independent. They're supposed to check and balance each other. That's what we're taught, right? So you've got the legislative branch, you got the executive branch, and the executive branch, the attorney for the executive branch tells the legislative branch that they can't assemble without permission from the governor, from the executive branch. And guess what the legislative branch did? Oh, okay, I guess we can't assemble. Okay, I guess we can't, even though the law says shall, right? And what was the purpose of that? So that the legislative can check the executive. So then we're very frustrated. We're going, look, you don't have to have permission from the executive branch in order to assemble. You're an independent body. And you're, not only that, you're our direct representatives. You don't need the permission from the governor in fact, the law would not even make sense if that was the case, right? Because when they assemble, and if they pass a joint resolution in the Senate and the House, they don't have to have the governor's permission. Or what I mean, but it's not like a regular bill that has to pass the House and the Senate, and then the governor signs it. It only has to pass the House and the Senate, and then it ends the order. It was clearly designed to stop the executive branch from from continuing an emergency order indefinitely. Okay? So they came back to us and said, well, just be patient. We will take care of it in the 2021 legislative session. Well, that was 9 months. And we're like, we have to deal with this tyranny and overreach and oppression, in our health districts, in our schools, in our businesses and all that for 9 months. And they're like, yeah, that's the only thing we can do. Okay, so everybody backed off, and then the 2021 session came around, and they did. They started a bill. They started a bill that was going to end the order. And it was just getting a little bit of momentum and starting to go into the committee. And the governor just saw it, and he's like, okay, he gets all the legislatures, call all the legislatures together, gets them all together, and they have a little private meeting. And he tells them, if you pass this bill and end my order, we won't qualify for the rest of the federal funds. Right? We won't qualify. And at this point, he had about, at this point, he had about $8 to $10 billion. Right? He was right in that range. And he's telling them that if you pass this bill, then we won't qualify for all the rest of the federal funds. So what did the legislature do? They stopped it. Never even went into committee. And it just stopped. And it's extremely frustrating, but our legislature is very weak, and they're being completely controlled, manipulated by the executive branch, by the governor, and they're doing it for money, federal money. And meanwhile, we are still today under the executive orders. Most of the people have just said, look, I'm not going to comply, and that's why Idaho is different, and that's why Idaho is more free. Because we just said, hey, look, we're not going to comply. And therefore, the governor's power, and ultimately the power to do that, is taken away from them if you're not obedient to it, and that is a proper way to check them. But if any time he wants to come down and try to use the state police or local police, he can say, well, it's still under order, and he could do that, right? You remember when he was doing stage 1 and stage 2 and stage 3 and all of that? Well, now he's claiming that his orders are rolling orders. There's no authority whatsoever to be doing what he's doing. So anyway, I just tell you this so you can a reality of where we're at. Like, we are in a situation right now where we have an individual that we call Governor Little, that has taken basically the powers of all 3 branches of government into one, and now he's being funded to the point where he has billions of dollars that he is not accountable to anybody for, and that's the situation we find ourselves in. I will say this, and then we'll get talking here a little bit more. I want to answer your questions. Idaho is, and I mentioned this, Idaho is different. When you look around, what's happening in Canada, that's not very far away, right? It's not very far away. And just because there's this imaginary line, it's not very far away. And those people are people just like us. And so, gotta get a drink of water here. And then you look at Washington, right? Oregon, California, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah's going there too. Montana's doing pretty good. Wyoming's doing fairly well. But Idaho is in a little pocket in the world. Let's look at Australia. They're under complete lockdown, where in the case where if you need to go get groceries, you got to wait till, let's say, like 1 o'clock because your last name starts with a B. Then you can send one person from the house to go out, get what you need, and come back, but you got to be back within an hour. And if you get stopped by the police, they can stop you for any reason. They don't have to have a probable cause, nothing. You got to give them ID, and if you're not within that hour, they arrest you. I've got video, I've got friends, that's what's going on. And that's basically a solitary confinement type situation. And that's what is all around us. Well, why is Idaho different? It's not that the governor didn't try to do it, right? We go across into Washington, it's different over there, right?
It's because the people won't stand for it.
That's right. It's because of the people. The people won't stand for it. I'm going to give you a little analogy, if I could. Let me drink. And then we'll talk. So I look at the Declaration of Independence, and the first line of the second paragraph, it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." A line that we recognize, right? 1776, right? And then we fought a bloody Revolutionary War, and it was through the grace of God we won against the most powerful navy and army really known to man at that time. And we won, just kind of a bunch of ragtags by grit and by the blessings and advantages of the Lord. So, and we declared that all men were equal. But then, now we find ourselves 100 years later fighting a civil war, partially because all men weren't being treated equal. So what happened there? Like, our founding documents clearly said that, but we find that in the Constitution there's actually a little bit of a compromise there. In fact, they call it the Great Compromise, right? And even to the point where representation, some people only had representation of 2/3 of a person, right? I think I'm wrong on that. It's anyway, I need to go get but basically not a full person. Okay? And then we find ourselves 100 years later in the 1860s fighting a civil war. And part of that was because all men were not being treated equal. Okay? And the 14th Amendment was ratified, and that was supposed to, by law, make it so that all men were equal. All men and women were equal, right? And then, what do we find ourselves doing 100 years later, now in the 1960s? What's going on?
They're treating us like cattle.
Well, 1960s, you got the civil rights movements and so forth, right? So getting to that. Well, you got people like Rosa Parks sitting on the front of the bus, but it was illegal for her to sit in the front of the bus. Well, I thought we had answered that question, right? They couldn't go in the public bathrooms, so, restaurants. They couldn't go to college, And so you see what I'm saying here, like, if we were declaring that all men were created equal, but that didn't happen, there was a little compromise in the Constitution, and then we had a revolutionary or a civil war, and we amended the Constitution in the 14th Amendment, but that still didn't correct it. Then we have the civil rights movements in the 1960s, and then something during that time happened. What was happening? What changed it? What was different? Before it was, documents. It was the courts. It was basically procedures, and the courts and the politicians decided that this is the way it was going to be, but it didn't change. But in the 1960s, it did change. Why?
People.
Because they said, that's right, as the people, they demanded to be treated equal, right? Mm-hmm. They said, look, I'm going to sit on front of the bus. I'm going to sit in the front of the bus. And if you can arrest me, you can do that, but the next time, as soon as I get out, I'm going to go sit on the front of the bus. I'm going to go into public bathrooms. I'm going to drink at the public drinking fountains. I'm going to go to school. And they started doing this. They united together and started doing this, right? And like it or not, which I do like it, by the way, it is what actually changed. It's what changed it. And so we think that many times the way that we uphold rights and maintain rights and protect rights is in the ballot box or in the courts. That is not the way the rights are maintained. They're not maintained there. They're maintained on the grounds in which they were established. They're maintained by claiming, using, and defending those rights. That's how they're maintained. And that's why Idaho is different right now. That's why we can have this meeting. That's why we can travel pretty much freely. That's why our businesses are open. And that's why the governor has his order in place, but it's not that effective. Because we as a people have said, look, we're going to live free. You're not going to do this to us. Right? And I think those lessons are very clear historically. I think we should learn from those lessons. And I think we continually need to apply them. Now you might say, well, then why are you running for governor? If the rights are maintained in the ballot box, why are you running for governor? And I'll tell you why. Because what is the whole purpose of a state?
Protect the rights of the individual.
That's right.
So,
To protect the rights of the individual. What was the purpose of the federal government?
Commerce.
Right? So the federal government, the idea of the federal government is to unite the states in national defense, international commerce, to be an appeals court so two or more states don't start fighting against each other. But ultimately, if we were to boil it down, it is to defend the states and the people against the outside world.
yeah.
And the states are also there to defend the people's rights against any other entity, including, by design, the federal government. The federal government, some reason, turned away from the rest of the world and started to put its targets on the people. What entities are supposed to be there to protect the people from that? The state, right? And so, to make it very simple, there is a great need for the state of Idaho and the other states too, to stand in defense of the people right now. Our rights are being terribly threatened. And they're being threatened by our own federal government, and they're being threatened by the world. They would like nothing more to come in and to strip the American people of their rights. And we have systems and checks and balances that are designed to protect against that. And the state of Idaho is one of those, a very important one. But yet, we need leadership. We need someone who will actually stand. Like, who likes what DeSantis is doing over there in Florida? You've been following that? Yeah. What's the difference between him and another governor? He just simply has the guts to say no. Right? No, you're not going to do that. No, I'm going to use the state's resources to protect the people from you doing that. You're not going to do that here in Florida. Right? And that's what has to happen. You have to have somebody who has the guts enough to say no. And who could put it together and have the mindset to be able to do that. And if we don't, we will end up another Oregon, another Washington, another California, Nevada, New Mexico, so on and so forth. Idaho will just be another state that was conservative, that was Republican, right? That's what we'll be if we don't, decide to do these things now. And I could get into a lot of detail there. But, so, as governor, that's what I intend on doing. I intend on uniting the legislature, getting them to see and understand, and us getting in the same direction, and start truly using the state in the purpose in which it was established, which is to protect the rights of the people. And there's a lot of details that I'm going to be doing. I'm proposing, if you go to my Keep Idaho, Idaho plan, proposing the elimination of property tax, elimination of income tax, working on getting our lands back in Idaho, controlling our own lands. 63% of our lands are being controlled by the federal government right now. 72% of our subsurface mineral rights. The state of Idaho can't even pay its own bills because 63% of its land base is being controlled by Washington, D.C. So what does Washington, D.C. do? They pay us what they call PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. So because you can't collect property tax and all these other taxes off the land and benefit from the land, we'll pay you a little bit just to keep you happy. It's called PILT. So anyhow, I hope that I've been able to plead my case just a little bit, and I want to have the rest of the time here to answer questions. I'm willing to answer any question. You notice you did come in and like write a question down, and you don't see my staff down there going through it, picking all the easy questions, and then I'll answer them. I'm going to open up and answer anything you want. You can ask about my personal life. You can ask about any question that you've had, and I hope you do. Whether you think I like the question or not. In fact, that's what I like. I want to answer your question. Because what do I hope to do here when we leave? I hope to have your support. I hope to unite you in saying, look, this is the guy that should be our governor. He's the one that's going to stand. He's the one that's going to be able to unite the people. He's the one that's going to be able to get the legislature back on the right track. He's the one that's going to strip the executive agencies and restore the power back to the people and to the legislature. He's the one that has a plan that's actually going to work. I want you to be able to say that when you leave here. And then, of course, that means you're going to tell your neighbors. You're going to even defend me when you're talking. That means you're going to donate to me. You're going to help me fund my campaign. So I can keep running around and doing media. It's expensive. That's what I'm here for. And I'm not here for my own self. I would much rather go home, be with my family. I would much rather build another business or do business. I'd much rather do that. And I could promise you I would much rather do that than do what I'm doing. But I have a love for my neighbor, and I see that we have to do something now. And Idaho has a great chance of doing it. Mm-hmm. We do. And I hope to talk about that in some of my answers. So with that, I'll stop talking until you ask me a question. Right here.
I think it's pretty clear that Idaho, needs new leadership, and you can control the Senate or the Congress and legislatures pretty well and handle things in-house. But our most imminent threat right now, pretty much everyone would agree, is probably federal overreach and the passing of legislation such as don't take the jab, we're going to fine the employer $100,000, 70, 700,000, whatever the absurd number, and we're going to bankrupt every company that doesn't comply. And those kind of draconian legislative pieces are why we need new leadership at the state level. So my question is how are you going to rally? How are you going to defend Idaho and the Idaho people against those kind of draconian, tyrannical forms of legislation? Because the current governor is going to comply.
Absolutely
and go along with the system. And you've already stated what the answer is, and the people have to not comply. I will not comply and be part of the evil. I will not be part of the lie. Whatever that lie is, and there's plenty of them out there, a lot of disinformation. But how can you help us become a force for unity, liberty, justice, morality, faith, and all the things that we hold dear? How can you do that? How are you going to oppose a tyranny that comes in on a railroad track? Like on July 23rd, I took my family to Silverwood, and my mouth dropped and hit the floor because there's a 2-mile train load of military vehicles sitting there right on the side of the road for 2 miles. What do they need those here in Idaho for? Why? I have no idea what they're there for. I would be jumped to conclusions, but the threats are going to be coming from the federal government.
Mm-hmm. So, great question. I mean, I think that's a question, well, I know it's a question because we've been all over the state multiple times. And that's a question that has been asked, in some form or another. How? So first of all, you're right on with the process. The people have to be willing to say no, okay? They have to be willing to say no. And they're much more willing to say no if they've got their neighbors around them, right? They're much more willing to say no if they got their local government around them. And they're a lot more likely to say no if they've got the state to back them and support them, right? And that's the way it should go. So they say no, and then if the federal government tries to come down into the state and say, well, we're going to force you, then we have our local governments and our state governments that are there saying, no, you're not. You are not going to do that. Now, what I experienced, and many of you may not know the history of what happened at the Bundy Ranch in 2014, but basically that's what happened. My dad said, no, this is my ranch. It's been in my family for 5 generations, for 135 years at that time, or whatever it was. And I have deeds with the state of Nevada, and you're not going to take it. But the problem is what did the state of Nevada and the county sheriff in Clark County do? What did he do? Does anybody know? They actually said, well, we're going to take a neutral position, right? So when you take a neutral position in that, when the state and the county takes a neutral position in that, it allows the federal government, the most funded, powerful government ever known in the history of man, with the most, the strongest, bureaucracies and the largest legal team, you allow them now to come down on a little ranching family who's just barely surviving, right? They're, we don't have the resources to fight the federal government. And it was never designed that way. And I always use it as an example. I use it as an example. If you have a young child and you have a pedophile, what is there to stop the pedophile from having his way with the young child? I realize I don't even like to talk about this, but it's such a great example. The parent, right? The parents. And they're supposed to stand in between that pedophile and that child and defend that child even if it costs them their life. Right? And any good parent would do that without any hesitation. But what if the parent says, well, I'm going to take a neutral position? That's not neutral. There's nothing neutral about that.
That's inviting chaos.
And that's no difference. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's probably some difference, but I think my point is being made. When you got a little ranching family and they're trying to defend themselves against this powerful entity, it's not a fair fight. And our founders knew it wasn't going to be a fair fight. And they understood that it was the state's job and the county's job to defend. And that was the design. They understood and knew that the federal government was going to at some time come down and try to oppress the people. They knew that. They lived it. That's what they fought for. That's what they fought from. And in fact, many of them, there was a huge debate about creating the federal government because they were worried about that. But the states were the mechanism that were there to stop it. And so there was other mechanism too, so to answer your question, I mean, that is what has to happen. And there's ways to do that. There's legal ways, there's political ways, there's a physical defense, there's stopping what is happening in Idaho, well, what's happening all over the world actually, but particularly in the States, is the federal government just printing money or taking the money, and they're coming down and they're saying, hey, school district, if you'll agree to our contract and our curriculum, we'll give you $5 million. And the school districts go, oh, $5 million. And they sign what's called an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, that they will comply. Then they go to your sheriff's department. They say the same thing. They're like, we need equipment. We got to hire another guy, and we need new trucks. And so they sign the Memorandum of Understanding of basically a use of force agreement. That's an escalation of force rather than a de-escalation of force. Then they go to the state and they do the same thing. They go to your hospitals, they do the same thing. They go to your health districts and they buy everybody off with federal money. And not only that, they actually all signed a contract. So what happens if they don't comply? The federal government's party, they pull them up into the federal courts. The judge says, well, right here you agreed. He now, drops and forces you to comply. And that's the situation. Our founders understood that if the federal government was going to take our resources into Washington, D.C., and then trickle them down to us, that it would create what they called undue obedience. That would have forced the states and the people into undue obedience. And so part of your answer, the final part of your answer is, we have to stop this flow of money coming in from the federal government. We have to stop it. We have to make it where it's legally, or like it's illegal, if you will, to sign a federal contract. What in the world is a school district contracting with the federal government, with Washington, D.C.? It's a complete violation of the Constitution.
Yeah.
It's an overstep. It's a complete breakdown of the jurisdictions and authority. And so that's at least a good part of your answer. And so, yeah, let's go on. Let's go on to another question, unless you want to add a little bit of follow-up. Let's go on to another question. Anything, right?
So, I know you didn't even register as a Republican or whatever until just about 3 months ago or whatever it was. So, you're entering the fray, running for governor. Little hasn't even announced if he's gonna run again.
Right.
I hope he don't. But.
He will.
Most likely.
Yeah.
So, how do you feel you're a better candidate than, say, McGeechan, who's, kind of been in the mix of things for quite a while? She's done some good stuff. Not everything good, but she has done some good things. How are you a better candidate than, say, McGeechan?
Well, first of all, I haven't been in there. So that's answer number one, right? I haven't been in there.
There is that.
I'm not beholden to anybody. I don't owe anybody. I'm free. I'm not compromised in any way. And I haven't been part of the problem. McGeechan has been in there for 12 years. And so, where have we been the last 12 years? What's been going on? I'm a man of action. I'm not someone who's just going to, put a task force together where everybody talks about it and then it just ends up doing nothing, just a waste of basically everybody's time. And that's something that she does a lot. And I don't understand why she would go through all that effort and then basically nothing's ever done. I'm a man of action. I've always done what I say I'm going to do, and I'll continue to do that. And I think, if you look into what I have done, I think you'll find that I have always done that. I've always, when I say I'm going to do something, I will do it. And sometimes that puts me at even great personal risk when in the sense of defending people. So that's kind of my final answer. I will defend the people. I will defend the people. I stood at great personal risk for the Hammond family. I had no dog in the fight other than I saw injustice. I stood at great risk to defend my family and my father. To be honest with you, I had no dog in the fight except I was raised there, but I had already left the ranch, almost 20 years prior. And I've done that many, many times. Wendy could tell you, every day people are calling me for help. And every day I am offering that help. Whether it's from a child that's missing to the state trying to take someone's property. I do it every day. It's become my life. And I will continue to do that. And I have effectively done that. And I'll give you one more example. And I'm not trying to in any way down Janice McGeehan. She is what she is. I think she's probably a nice person. I think she has a lot of good intention. I don't think she understands the principles of the Constitution very well. I think it shows in her actions, especially these recent actions. But in 2020, in Ketchum, Idaho, Hardware Brewing Company decided they were going to stay open. And it was kind of a big deal. And there was several people, including politicians, that came there and kind of that were supporting kind of the being open. Well, anyhow, Janice McGeehan and Raul Labrador got their pictures taken with the owners during this time, and it was kind of like to the governor, like, thumbing their nose at the governor. It certainly was, right? And that picture got into the national news, and they made a big deal out of it. The lieutenant governor is going in, and which I liked. I'm like, that's awesome that she would do that. But then Idaho State Police came in and warned them that if they don't shut down, something's going to happen. And then a few days later, they came in and raided them. Took their computers, shut their business down, run everybody out, right? Idaho State Police. This is the governor a little retaliating, because of the picture and the attention that they got and the little dispute between the lieutenant governor. Well, guess who the owners of Hardware Brewery called? Did they call Janice McGeehan? Did they call Raul Labrador? No, they called Ammon Bundy. Now, I sent hundreds of people over there and gave them support. We stood them. We sent a message to the Idaho State Police that they better back off. And so, that's the difference. And you get to make that choice. You get to make that choice. You could completely reject me if you want. Or you can say, look, this is what we need right now. Maybe in 10 years you don't need someone like me. Maybe 5 years ago you didn't need someone like me. But I will stand. I will stand. I promise you that. I will.
What's your stand on BLM?
Which one?
Bureau of Land Management or Black Lives Matter? Well, they're about the same. So, Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization. It's very clear that it is. They don't care about the people. They don't care about the black people, and so ultimately that's my stand on them. You might be talking about the rumor out there that I joined Black Lives Matter.
That's what I heard. Someone
Okay,
said
so
that.
that's a lie.
Okay.
I could give, but let me give you a little background of how they spun that lie, so you can understand the details.
Okay.
So, 2020 was full force. They were trying to lock us down. They tried to lock down our churches, they sent all the kids home from school. They said that only essential businesses, you couldn't travel and all that, right? It's going on. Well, I wasn't going to live under those conditions, so I organized a group called People's Rights, and you might be familiar with that, and began to rally people all over, and then all over the United States, and it's a very local thing. And we created a network now that has about 60,000 people in it. Well, we were really making a difference. We were showing up to these places. That's who I sent to the Harbor Brewing Company. We activated them. Washington was, had their network, and they were doing the same thing. Oregon, Montana, and Florida. Florida was pushing back using the People's Rights Network and system clear back from the very beginning of 2020. And I can't help but believe that led into the election of DeSantis and them standing so strong. So anyway, give you that background, because then Black Lives Matter came into the picture. And they started in other states looting and fires, everything that went on there. Well, they decided they were going to come to Idaho, or they were going to unite and organize in Idaho. So we used the People's Rights Network to work with the militias and so forth. And we had people standing at businesses in Coeur d'Alene, and they protested, and it was peaceful. Whether it was because people were standing as a deterrent or not, I don't know. And the same thing happened in Boise. We organized, and stood at the businesses and made a strong statement that you're not going to do this here in Idaho. And they peacefully protested, and then they started going to the Capitol building a couple times a week, it seemed like. Every week, or multiple times a week. Well, then what happened was something interesting. Because quote unquote patriots, and I do say quote unquote patriots, started going down there and actually assaulting, spitting, and actually assaulting the people of Black Lives Matter for them protesting. Okay? And they reached out to us. I think it was more kind of a probing thing, but like said, well, if you're really, and I wasn't the one getting the message directly. They were doing it through a Facebook page that we had, right? But they said that if you're really for people's rights, what about our right to peacefully protest? And you know what? I agree with them. As long as they're going to do it in the proper way, they have a right to go do that. And they claimed that they were being assaulted and spit upon, right? And I said, well, I told the people that were managing the page, well, let's find out to see if that's really going on. And sure enough, it was going on. That quote unquote patriots were going down there and assaulting them and spitting on them while they were being peaceful in their effort to protest, right? So I sent a message and I said, well, tell them that I'll come down there and I'm going to come and hold a Lavoy Finicum sign, okay? That'll say Justice for Lavoy Finicum, which is a friend and a fellow rancher that was shot by Oregon State Police in the back 3 times with his hands in the air. And so my intention was to go down there. I was going to stand with that sign, and if any quote-unquote patriot started to do what they were doing, I was going to confront them. And I was hoping that I had enough influence to talk to them about how, if you don't afford them the right, how it will be taken from us. Right? Well, anyhow, Black Lives Matter, the organization and national, found out about it. And they, of course, didn't like it. And there was a big internal controversy. And ultimately, they said, we don't want you to come down there. And I said, fine, I don't want to come down there anyway. And that's where it ended. And then the media says, well, Ammon Bundy's going to joining Black Lives Matter. And they run with it. And they did it, try to justify, Black Lives Matter and somehow say that even I am going to join them, which was an absolute lie. So that's where that's at. I really believe that there's a tremendous amount of people in the Black Lives Matter organization that are being deceived. And I hope at some point that we have the opportunity to reach out to them and teach them the correct principles of government. Teach them how socialism, communism does not work and why, and how dangerous and wicked it is. And, if we have that opportunity, I'm going to take that opportunity. And I hope the people don't say, well, look, he's somehow siding with the enemy. No. There are people that are, a tremendous amount of people that are probably really good people that are being deceived right now by a very wicked organization that has just pure communist goals. So there's my ultimate answer. What else? What else we got? Right here, and then right here.
It's convoluted, is everybody's jumping in the governor's race all of a sudden. And if you don't get in, are you gonna give up, or are you gonna try it the next go around too?
Let me get a drink of water.
Because literally, my whole life, I've haven't been really political, because I think it's a joke.
Amen.
Yeah, everybody except for one or more representatives, they all started out pretty decent, but only she is the only one that stood her ground. Everybody else has played their games in Boise.
Yeah.
And they turned on us, and they'll tell you they haven't. But because they have to play their games, they're turning with them.
Yeah. So I wouldn't run for any other position other than governor. And the reason why is because the danger and the problems and the power is being held in the executive agencies. Department of Health, Department of Education, CPS, I could go on and on and on. That's where the power is being held, and that's where the abuses are happening. And as the head of the executive, as someone that can get in there and be strong with that position and say, look, I am your boss, and we will do these things. And I intend on stripping down the powers of those agencies, those bureaucracies, returning the powers that belong to the legislatures, like budgeting, like, assembling, and the rest goes back to the people, right? Now, to answer your question, no. I don't plan on being a lifetime politician. I feel like now is the time. I've been inspired to do it now. I don't want to be a politician. I have no intention. And if the people reject me and my message right now, I probably won't ever run again. So that's where I'm at right now, I can tell you that. I have no intention of being some long-term politician. I plan on going in for 4 to 8 years and stripping these powers, getting a lot of things straightened out, and protecting the people within the authority in which I have. And then when I'm done, I'm going to go back to taking care of my grandkids. At that point, I'll probably have a few grandkids. So that's where I'm at. So, and then right here, you had a.
Well, so she spoke of BLM, the Bureau of Land Management. If you look at that agency, you know, what's happened within that agency is, you know, these native tribes and stuff, they've gotten kind of infiltrated in a way and almost outmaneuvered what's going on in our country. And it's a threat, especially in this state, that we don't realize. And you spoke of MOUs, memorandums of understanding. Well, we've had memorandums of understanding. McEachin spoke of this in 2015, I think, for the Shoshone-Bannock tribe, and then we have the Nez Perce tribe, which I'm part Nez Perce. But what's problem is these tribes, their influence is outside. And it's almost like a proxy government that's landed within the state. And my question is, I guess, you know, how do you plan on dealing with that in a lot of the influence that's coming into, you know, for instance, my family and so people, they're on the left, I mean, far left, and you know, I mean, right is right and wrong is wrong, and you just know when right is right and wrong is wrong. And how do you know, I mean, that's an unspoken adversary, I'm not gonna say adversary, but unspoken, you know, situation that's arising, and they're getting more power, they're getting more money, they're getting more, you know, I mean, a lot more influence, and it's kind of, you know, in the shadows, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. I've seen and understand what you're talking about. Not in this country, but you know where I'm at. I've also seen, you know, that in Oregon, and like if you're familiar with the Klamath Falls situation with the water there, and the federal government uses the tribes as an excuse. And the tribes, of course, have no problem with going along with it. And so how, as a state, you know, as a governor, how do I help that? Because it is a growing problem, and they are gaining so much power. And really what it is it's not that the native people are getting power. It's that the federal government is getting power using them. Yeah, they're just using them. You've got, you know, and you know, it doesn't.
For tyranny.
Yeah, exactly, and you don't, and then, you know, that's my message to the you know, Native American people. Look, you're being used. You're being used. You're being manipulated, and you need to wake up, and you need to, you know, not be manipulated anymore. And it's pretty hard to do that if you're dependent on the tribe and the federal or the federal government, which is pretty much the same thing. If you're dependent on them for your living, right? So, I mean, I'll just, I want to answer your question, but it is a pretty complicated answer, because most of all of that's done through treaty laws, which is authorized by the Constitution, right? The only thing is why aren't these people that were put in reservations, why aren't they now given basically the freedom? Why aren't they part of the state? You know, what would be wrong with it? And I'm not saying we do this, I'm just saying, why couldn't the reservations become a county? Right? Why couldn't they become a county? Why couldn't they be functioning like the counties? You know, and the reason why is because the federal government doesn't want to let them go, and they get a ton amount of power, and many of the people are dependent upon the federal funds, and so it just ends up being kind of a cesspool of socialism. That's what it is. And You know, my message to the Native Americans: you're never going to, you know, flourish and benefit and prosper under those conditions. At one time, they used to be the most independent people probably ever in the history of the world, where they could take and live off of almost any land, including down in the dry desert that I grew up in. There's hieroglyphics everywhere. They weren't there when my family came in there in 1877, but there's tons of evidence that they were there for a long periods of time before that. So anyhow, you know, I understand the danger, but it's really, and it is a danger, because the federal government and these extreme environmentalists are using the tribes and the people to get what they want. And that is control of the land and the resources, limiting people from using it, and a ton of money and ton of power. And the people like, oh, Native Americans, you know, the indigent people, and you know, we have to, it becomes part of this woke movement. And it's no good for anybody. It's about like Black Lives Matter organization. So anyway, I don't know if that was much of an answer, but I just want to let you know that I do understand, and that it is a problem, and it's something that, to be honest with you, I think that the Native people need to be free.
Yeah.
They need to be free from that. So
You can't be free when you don't know you're enslaved, and that's the problem.
yeah. Oh man, I could tell you a story, but I'll save it for later. Maybe I'll tell you some other time. But I just had, you know, and I'll also say this. One of the ranchers that my dad was one of 53 ranchers in that area. He's the only one left now. Every one of them were driven out by the federal government. Either that or they just couldn't survive anymore. And multiple of those families were Native American. Right? Then we ranched right beside them. We helped each other. So they don't care who they drive off. If the agenda isn't the right agenda, it doesn't matter who you are. They'll run you off. If you're Native American, they'll trample on you just like anybody else. Don't for once think that just because you're this type, this race, whether you're black, or whether you're Asian, whether you're Native American, that these wicked people that are destroying our country won't just destroy you right along with it. They're using you, just like they've used us and other people as well. So, my answer. So right here and then right here.
I just wanna know how do you think that you could abolish the property tax or income tax or whatever it is that you're saying?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I was hoping that someone would ask me about that. Because the question is, if we eliminate property tax, and what's the obvious question?
Where's it coming from?
Where does the funds
Yeah.
to fund legitimate government come from, right? Because there is legitimate government, right? We enjoy our sheriff's departments as long as they do what they're supposed to do, right? We like to be able to call on them if we need them. We like our we like our roads. Some people like the schools, some people don't. We could talk about that and here later if we want. But so legitimate purpose of the government. And what I'm proposing is to replace property tax with a consumption tax. So what's the major problem with property tax?
You
You
don't
pay off your house, you still pay.
That's right. You never own your home, right?
Yeah.
You literally never own your home.
Yeah.
There are states right now like New Jersey, New Hampshire that are charging $14,000, $15,000, $16,000 a year in property taxes. It's to the point where, well, I don't need to. Oregon's terrible too, right? Washington's terrible too. I mean, where they literally are pricing people out of their homes, and they can own their home, meaning have no mortgage on it. It is a way in which people can lose their right to property. And property tax is a Marxist idea. It was spurred by Marxists. It's one of the pillars found in the Communist Manifesto written by Karl Marx. It is not something that the country or the United States was based upon. How did we pay for schools before property tax? Anybody have an idea?
2 sections in every township.
Man, you're the first one that can answer that. Did you know that? There was sections of land that was set aside every, what was it?
2 sections, 2 full sections, I want to say.
Yeah.
3 or 16 and 36.
And a section is 640 acres, right?
1 square mile.
Okay, that was set aside. Every so many sections there was set aside, and that's what we call state land. Or, in other terms, school lands.
Being down.
Right? That's right, exactly. And that's how we were going to pay for schools and some other things. But now most of them just sit empty. They might graze on them a little bit or do nothing with them because they got lazy and they said, well, let's start charging property tax. This is a lot easier just to make somebody else work for it, and then we can just take it from them rather than, leasing land, developing land, those sections. They were there to create income for the schools. But now they found an easier way. But it's a Marxist way, because now it puts the state in basic ownership over your land, your private property. Okay? So I'm proposing that we eliminate it. I'm proposing that we start using these sections like we're supposed to. I'm also proposing that we put in a consumption tax and completely get rid of property tax altogether. And that would be, so if a property is sold, there would be a consumption tax at the time of the new person who buys it would pay that, and they could roll that into the mortgage if they want to. And the difference is, when you're done paying off the mortgage, guess what? You own your home. And I could go through the numbers with you without even using the government or the state land. But remember, property tax is something they put into place in the early 1900s. Well, what did we do for the first 200 years? Right? These things are these type of actions are not liberty actions. They're things that people put in place later so that they can grow government, so they get more power, so they can take over private property. Karl Marx, one of his most, I think, important statements he made is that he said that you can sum up communism into one sentence: the abolition of private property. That's what communism is. He says it himself, that you can sum up communism in one sentence: the abolition of private property.
What about income tax?
So income tax has literally become a lush fund for the state. And I'm proposing that we eliminate it and we don't replace it with anything.
I'm all for that.
Yeah, we need to downsize our bureaucracies, we need to expand expenses, and we do not need income tax. We don't. And there's 9 other states that are not collecting income tax right now. It can be done, and it should be done in Idaho. So, thank you.
Yeah.
I hear you.
That was actually pretty much my question, but hello, I'm Ammon Bundy and I'm your governor. You can't bang down the gavel and get these to happen. What is your avenue to get there?
Yeah, so these things that we're talking about are things that I have to lead the legislature in doing properly. Now, I will say this, so I'm going to say 2 little things. Because I could go in as governor for 4 years or 8 years and never even open my door to the legislature, never talk to them, never do nothing, and just work on stripping down the powers of the bureaucracies in the executive branch, which I would have power to do, right? Actually limiting their powers, getting them downsized, the powers that they've usurped, getting them back to the legislature and back to the people. And I could do that for 4 to 8 years and do the people of Idaho a tremendous amount of good. But the thing is we want to set things in place, such as getting rid of property tax, income tax, and other things, working to get our lands back and our resources back. And that is going to take working with the legislature. And I have full confidence that I will be able to unite the legislature in a direction, in these things. And I will be able to do that. Why? Because hopefully I have the people behind me. And, you know, we saw this happen, right? If the people will get behind a governor or a leader or something, the power that they hold is so tremendous. I've seen it multiple times. And if we could get a vision and a plan, which is what our Keep Idaho, Idaho plan is, have this vision, get people to understand it, unite people behind it, I am certain that I will be able to unite the legislature. And many of you know that even in more dire situations, I have been able to unite, you know, thousands and tens of thousands of people in a very quick time to go in a certain direction for the defense of individuals. So it is one of my, each one of us have gifts, many gifts. One of these, this is one of the things that I've been able to do. And I might fail in other ways, like I might not have certain other gifts, and I recognize those. But one of the things I've been able to do in my life is unite people around certain causes, and especially when it comes to the principles of liberty, the Constitution, and defending people's rights. And I believe I will be able to do that in these situations, and hopefully come out as governor of a constitutional republic rather than a dictator like we have now. So, go ahead.
So, McGeehan has unseated a somewhat deep state of Mormon. Idaho has a little bit of a Mormon deep state, I'm sure you're familiar with. So how do you dispel the maybe uneasiness of people that you're just going, because you are Mormon?
I am.
If that's, are you just around your brotherhood and you're getting back in? I mean, how do you?
Yeah, that's how I'm going to get in. Actually, I think I have more of a challenge there than in other areas. I mean, that's a good question. I don't have any. I'm not beholden to anyone. I think that I probably am going to have as much of a challenge of convincing people that are members of the church to elect me rather than these establishment guys. People like Scott Bedke. I mean, he's been in there forever. He's actually, in my opinion, and I know firsthand, he's a terrible person. And for me to say that publicly into the mic, I wouldn't say that if I didn't actually have the reasons for saying that. And he's a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, just like I am. And, you know, my challenge is literally to strip the power or get the people to recognize that men like him are not good. That they're not going to, they've had the power for the last 4 decades in Idaho, and they haven't put forth one righteous effort or one righteous platform. They just haven't. All they've done is empower and enrich themselves. And so, I mean, that's a really good question. I just have to convince you that I'm here for you, and I'm not beholden to anybody. And I mean, that's something I have to do. I have to do that. And anyway, I guess I leave it at that. You know, look at what I've done in the past. Look at how I've stood. Look at even how I've, understand that there are many different powers and different things pulling, and I haven't been influenced by those. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Great question, though. Thank you for asking that question. What else?
When you were locked up, what gave you, I couldn't imagine going through that. What, outside of God, what give you strength? What give you power?
Well, so, there may be others in here that may not know that in 2016, the federal government came and rounded up my entire family and threw us in federal prison. And they charged us with charges in Oregon, and then they also charged us with charges in Nevada. And total, those charges were minimum sentencing of 106 years. So they were trying to take our life away. We had not done even close to what they were accusing us of, and so we were innocent men in there. We were, locked away, and we were in there for 2 years. And about half of that time I was in there, and a few others were in solitary confinement. So I spent a ton of time, months and months and months on end in a little concrete box, and never did see the light of day. And in many cases, like, I wouldn't talk to somebody for several days, and then a guard might come up and say something, and you go to talk to him, and your voice doesn't even work because you haven't talked. You had to work through that. And so, I guess the question is how did we get through that? And I know you said without God, or somehow that way, but it was simply that, relying on Him for strength. And let me explain what I mean by that. In those situations, I've got a little family. I had a little family. My youngest right here that you saw, he was 1 year old. When I come home on his 3-year-old birthday. And missing that time, I had a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old and all the way up. Missing that time. And not only that, seeing and knowing that they were struggling just to pay the bills and stay in our home and all of those things, and they were hurting inside, right? And I'm locked in a box, and I can't do anything about it. And never for 2 years, I was never allowed once to have any physical contact with my family, not one time. And so that being in that circumstance is extremely, extremely difficult. But what helped us what got us through it, and the point I want to say is, of course, just having enough faith to be able to not lose faith in God and reaching out to Him, but then for Him to reach back and began to help and just give us little glimpses of what was going to happen. Little glimpses that you will be free sometime. Little glimpses of that I'm going to make this right. And even understanding how that was going to happen to a certain extent. And once that began to happen, then that was enough to know, look, sometime I am going to be able to get out. Sometime I'm going to be restored back to my family. Sometime that, that this is going to be made right. And knowing that helped me to not fall into despair. And it got to the point where I even understood to a certain level, and I say understood because that's probably the best way I can explain it, what the Lord was going to do. And I actually even felt sorry for the prosecutors because I understood a little bit of what He was going to do. And they spent $100 million trying to prosecute my family in 2 different trials. We were acquitted on all charges in Oregon. We go down there, fight another case in Nevada, went through literally hell, and get there and start to get the truth in front of the jury, and they could see that we were going to do it again. The same thing was going to happen in Oregon was going to happen in Nevada, and they decided that it was better to just drop the case, dismiss it with prejudice, than to look terrible once again. And so it was just an absolute miracle that we saw coming from a long, long time. And we beat the federal government, my little family, in court with the advantage of the Lord multiple times, went home to our families, went back to work and back to living. And that's what happened.
Did you get restitution for that?
No, many people say, well, you should sue the federal government and all of that. And I don't believe that there's a whole lot of justice going on in the federal courts. And, I don't want to spend my time in there. I don't. And the Lord will work it all out. And I hope that anybody who was involved that did that to my family, repents of that so they don't have to pay the price in the next, in what is coming. And whatever happens with them, that's fine. I'm gonna go live my life and be with my family. I'm gonna, unite with my neighbors and defend them. And that's where I stand. So no, there was no restitution or
So,
anything.
if you're barred from the Capitol, how are you gonna get in if you're elected?
So I kind of think that's a funny question, because think about it. If I somehow am trespassed from the Capitol building because of a charge, right? As governor, what's the first thing, the power I have?
Pardon yourself.
I can pardon myself and walk in the Capitol at any time. Although that is not needed, because it was a year thing, and I think the year thing is up. But anyway, yeah, it was, find that, people like, well, wait a minute, what, and I was like, well, the governor has pardoning power, and, I would use that. I wouldn't use it for just myself. There was many people that have been trespassed for going to school board meetings, going to health district meetings, so and so. They were trespassed, and the state used their resources to actually, strip those rights from the people. And that's why our founders understood that the governor or somebody needs to have the power to pardon. So that, imagine if prosecutors, kept insisting on prosecuting people for exercising their right, participating in government, right? Yet someone was going along and just pardoning those people, they would stop doing it. And anyway, interesting thought. Well, we've got maybe enough time for a couple more questions, and then trying to wrap this up. So right here in the back here, go ahead.
You talked about potentially trying to reclaim some of the land that the federal government owns in order to remedy the lack of affordable housing. Do you think that's even possible, and how might we do that?
Absolutely. So, not some of it, all of it. Okay. Again, the federal government is controlling 63% of the land in Idaho and 72% of the subsurface mineral rights in Idaho. And first of all, it's unconstitutional, and it puts the state at such a disadvantage. Really, the people of the state at such a disadvantage. It's like having $1 million in the bank, but you can't use $630,000 of it. It just has to stay there, or someone else gets to use it, and all of that, right? Land and natural resources are what people have to live off of. It's what we build our homes with. It's where our clothes come from, our food comes from, our phones, our devices. Everything comes from the land, comes from the earth, right? And so if you have an entity that's coming in and controlling 63% of the land, it puts the people at an extreme disadvantage, and we will never, ever be able to be free and independent like we're supposed to be as a state until we get back our lands and resources. We won't. Okay? And so the need is there. But it's also, so there's that, the reality of that. But also effects of what it is causing in Idaho right now in real time is that we don't have enough supply and demand for our supply. We have way too much demand for housing, so our housing costs are shooting so high, right? Well, in order to get more supply, we're going to have to take back these lands, okay? Now, you might say, well, there's a lot of private property around. We can just build on that. But what's the problem there? What land are we talking about?
Somebody owns it.
Well, somebody else owns it, yeah. That's fine. We could trade and all that. But it's agricultural land, right? What's the number one industry in Idaho? It's agriculture. So because we're landlocked now, we can't build out. We can't build out in the hills and so forth. So now we're building on our agricultural land, and we're destroying our number one economy, number one industry. We are literally destroying it. There's figures that we're talking about hundreds of thousands of acres that are being transferred from agriculture to housing right now. when we got beautiful land that we can grow and build on, that's not our agricultural land. But we have to build on it, or we don't have to. Well, we pretty much do, or people got to stop moving here, right? But that's the second part of it. And the third part is what's happening to our cities, especially Boise area, is it's becoming more and more densely populated. They're building skyrise apartments and they're getting more dense populated. And we have great examples of what happens to cities when they get densely populated. They become more and more liberal. And then they become so populated in such a small area that they begin to control politically the rest of the state. And create what I call a Hunger Games syndrome, where you got the capital city and they're all acting gay and dressing weird and makeup and all that, right? And they're controlling getting the resources from all the districts, and they're just pumping in the resources while they're working and barely making it. And that's what's happening. Look at what happened to Oregon. You got Portland, you got Seattle, you got Las Vegas, you got multiple places in California that are functioning like that. You got a big city and then around them, right? That's what's happened with Denver and Colorado, New Mexico. And the answer is to not become a dense populated city. Let it grow out. Because there's something about when you grow out and you got a yard and you got some land, there's something that ties you to reality. You don't think that milk comes from Albertsons. Right? You might have a few chickens in the backyard and you realize that your eggs actually come from chickens. And then when those chickens get old, you might actually kill them and put them in a pot and realize that they taste pretty good, and that's where chicken comes from. But if you lose that connection, then all of a sudden, it's just there, and everybody else becomes slaves to fill the grocery stores inside the city. And that's just practical. So the question, because yours was, I'm answering a very long way, but I need to build the platform of why it's so important. Okay? Why? And I think we've answered that. It's extremely important in order to preserve our conservative identity in Idaho, in order to literally preserve liberty in Idaho. We have to get back these lands. Now the question is how? Well, I'm going to be very simple. These lands, so let's look at a map. Everybody's looked at a map, and you see a green area that's private property, right? And it's the city. And then right outside of that, there's like this land, and there's this border, and it's all now federally controlled land. You notice I never call it BLM land or Forest Service land. We have to stop doing that. It does not belong to them, and I'm going to explain. Why is that area private property and just outside of that is not? Yeah, it's unappropriated lands. It's correct. So what made that private property?
Act of Congress.
What's that?
Somebody took it, somebody claimed it.
Somebody claimed it. Right? Yeah, there was different disposal acts and so forth, but they came in and they said, look, this is going to be my section of land. I claim it. Right? And they did that all over the West, but it was mainly around the places they can make agricultural land out of, right? That's why it's such prime agricultural land that are our cities and all that. They leveled it, they put irrigation in it, and they began to grow crops on it. But why is just outside of those lands, why is now all of a sudden that's federally controlled land?
Because it's never put to use.
No one ever claimed it. No one claimed it. Right? And the federal government came in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, said, look, no one has claimed this land in the West. And they began to claim it. They began to do their maps and put BLM signs all over, Forest Service signs. They began to, send their engineers out there, and they created these maps. So when we open our maps, it says BLM, it says Forest Service, and we all automatically think that, oh, it's theirs. And it's always been theirs. And that's not accurate. That is not accurate. We had every opportunity, and historically we did it. If you were in that time, you could have gone out there and claimed that land. Right? Could have claimed it. But the interesting thing is, because I'm answering your question here, is that let's say you take a section of this federally controlled land and you go down to the county recorder and you say, I'd like to see the title to this. What is the county recorder going to say?
There isn't one.
There's no title. There is no title. They'll say, well, that's BLM land, that's Forest Service land. Well, I want to see the title. I want to see the transfer title. I want to see that, right? They're like, there is none. It's unappropriated lands. And what does the county and the state have power to do? Appropriate lands. That's right. And we're going to use that power. We're going to appropriate these lands. And yeah, is there going to be a battle? Oh yeah. There's going to be a battle. But guess who's going to fight the battle? The state. It's not going to be the people. It's not going to be a little rancher down there trying to say like, man, this has been in my family since 1877. It's going to be the state saying, look, you constitutionally do not have authority to come in and claim our lands. You don't. We entered the state on equal footing. We have the right, we have control of these lands, and we have the power to appropriate, and we're going to appropriate it. And how we're going to appropriate it? Through an act of disposal that will have to be flushed out, will have to be responsible to make sure it doesn't go into a big corporation's hands, to make sure it goes into individuals' hands, to make sure that it goes into multiple individuals' hands. And somebody has warmed up me up to this idea to give the people of Idaho first dibs, right?
Like a homestead 2.0?
Yeah. There's been many times in history of this country and others where land disposal acts or efforts have been implemented. Well, we live in a great time, and we have a whole bunch of land that needs to be disposed of to the people. And the state, under Ammon Bundy governorship, will do that. And we'll fight that battle, and that's what we'll do. And it's absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary. For even just to feed ourselves. We cannot keep building on our agricultural land and expect Idaho to be able to stay an agricultural state and have the influence of an agricultural state in the world when we're building on our agricultural land. So in my mind, unless someone can convince me otherwise, I believe it's absolutely necessary that we do this. So thank you for your question. There was one back here. Hey.
I've seen a lot of controversy online about open borders. People are saying, and even news I think is saying that you're for open borders. That's the new controversy. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I joined Black Lives Matter. And now I love the invasion, right? So this is a question that has been asked me a lot. And I think it's rooted because I disagreed with President Trump on his methods and mechanism in trying to stop the flow of immigrants coming in here. And right now we have a flow of immigrants coming into Idaho, right? I'm not talking about necessarily from outside the country, although I might be talking about like from Oregon, right? They're flowing in. Okay, so the question is, jurisdictional borders are absolutely necessary. I'll just say that right out. Jurisdictional borders are absolutely necessary, right? And walls are typically and historically have been used to keep people in, not keep people out. Let's just be real with ourselves, right? So how do we actually solve the problem of people flowing into an area that we really don't want or they're not good for our state or our country? And to me, it's very simple because you can identify these people into three different categories. Not stereotyping, I'm just identifying them, right? You have those that are coming in for a handout, right? They want to take advantage of basically government welfare. And then you have those coming in for criminal opportunity. There's an opportunity there. They take advantage of that, right? And then there's those that want freedom and are looking for prosperity and freedom and opportunity. Okay? Now, How do you stop the ones that want to come in? And I'm talking about Idaho. How do you stop Oregons from coming into Idaho that want welfare?
No what though?
Yeah, you don't offer the welfare, right? That's a big, hard thing to think about, right? I mean, you don't offer the welfare. You don't provide it. And then now anybody who wants to come to this area, then we go, don't go to Idaho, go to Oregon. Like literally. And anybody who's here that's trying to live off the system, well, it's dried up in Idaho. I'm moving to Oregon. I'm moving to Washington. I'm going to these socialist states, right? And all of a sudden you end up with a people that aren't here for welfare. Now, how do you solve the problem of those coming here for criminal opportunity?
Everybody packs.
What's that?
Everybody packs.
Absolutely. Everybody packs, right? You got to get your criminal justice system working properly so that it's punishing true crime, not some state made up stuff, right? So, and what is true crime? When someone infringes upon the life, liberty, and property of somebody else, right? And the state will go, boom, we're going to punish that. We're going to require the perpetrator to restore the damages, plus punitive damages, back to the victim. And guess what? You send that message and you're strong on that. And all of a sudden, everybody around the country and around the world go, don't go to Idaho for criminal opportunity. Right? It's just not worth it. Man, if you go steal in Idaho, the state makes you pay it back plus, 30% or whatever it might be. Don't do that. It's not worth stealing in Idaho. And they don't come here for that. So now you've just taken care of. And the third people, the ones who want freedom and prosperity, guess what? We want them to come. We need them to come. We want them. We want them to unite with us. They have the right ideas. They want to come here and live here. They want to be good neighbors. They want to stand for each other. They understand what it is to lose freedom in another state or another country.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Get out of California.
Yeah, and welcome. And we I'm 7 years, so I don't know if I could say this or not. I'm here been 7 years. But we need to understand the difference between someone coming in for welfare, someone coming in here for criminal opportunity, and someone coming in here for freedom. And we need to realize that. We need to welcome the people that are coming here for freedom. We need to stand with them as they stand with us and be good neighbors. And we need to drive the others out. And I'll say it loud and clear. Yeah, media, I said that. We need to drive the other people out of the state of Idaho so that we can preserve liberty here. Sorry, I
No problem.
So that's my answer. That's it, loud and clear. And man, can you imagine what Idaho would be with a people that didn't have welfare dependence? And I'm not talking about charity because just so you know, anything the state provides as far as welfare is not charity. Charity comes by the will of people giving it up willingly, and it's typically an individual, families, or the church. And that's the way it was for a couple 100 years, and that's what it would be returned to. If there's people in temporary need, if they need their family, first of all, if they can't get out of it, then their family should help them. If their family doesn't have the resources, or if they don't have the family, then the church should help them, and that community should help them willingly. There should be no, I'm taking money because I'm the state, and then I'm going to give it to someone over here who really is just using it. There should be none of that. That's not charity. So, great question. Thank you. And we probably ought to wrap up. So I just want to finish up. I want to give Wendy a few minutes here. I just want to emphasize, that Idaho is a beautiful, wonderful place. But it's not only just a beautiful land. It's not only a beautiful state, but it's a beautiful idea. An idea of liberty and freedom. An idea of independence. Even rugged independence. An idea of just being left alone. Being allowed to live the way you want to live. And I believe we have a great opportunity to flourish under those ideas. to unite and use the state's resources to protect our rights. And I believe if we do it right and we become an example of this, that other states will start doing it. That it'll become a domino effect. And maybe other places in the world will start doing it. And we can now surge from Idaho this idea of liberty, this idea of freedom and independence, and that rights come from God, not from government, not from another man or another woman, right? And doesn't our world need this? It needs it.
Yes.
It absolutely needs an example, a bastion of freedom, a light on the hill. And Idaho, the climate, the political climate is perfect for that right now. It's perfect. And so, if I've gained your confidence, or if I can gain your confidence, I hope that we can unite together behind these ideas and actually become that example. And so I thank you for your time. Appreciate your patience and your questions, and enduring through my long answers. So thank you. I'd like to give Wendy a few minutes here. Wendy?